this whole kind of quest or journey began for me. I think it began in too many places, okay? Too many roots and sources, but one kind of important springboard was my first huge piece of research in my first book, Parenting for a Peaceful World, in which I just found from so many different fields of study, anthropology, neuropsych, psychohistory, etc. So many streams of story and investigation. This sense that childhood matters so much in shaping not only our way of experiencing, of processing who we think we are in the moment, who I think I see when I see you. That childhood matters so enormously, childhood experience. Probably more to the point, my body memory of childhood experience, right? And where that becomes political, actually, is that the depth and the depth to which body memory that is triggered each time that I perceive you, that I think I perceive you, it colors and shapes my lens. It alters, it modifies who I think I'm seeing. It narrows the focus so that when I look at you, I see a kind of a mixture of perhaps partly you, but also the things that my body memory continually and incessantly projects, of filled with triggers of what you remind me, who you remind me of, because of this or because of that, all kinds of visual cues, oral cues, through all of the senses. That means something in how we form society. It drives history. It drives politics. So much that I noticed a transformation in how I read all current events, where it became a habit of mind for me. As this discovery sank deeper and deeper and deeper, it began with just a kind of a philosophical and intellectual kind of an understanding in my head. And most people already have that. Most people say, yeah, I know childhood is important. But then what? But then what? Do we live into that? Do we live into why that's, what most people do is, yeah, I know childhood is formative and important. And then we carry on doing the same stuff that we were doing yesterday. It hasn't really anywhere near sufficiently altered our social policy, our way of being with one another. If childhood is important, then what? So, I mean, I'm fascinated by what happens when this sinks from the head all the way to the pit of your gut, where it becomes second nature. That immediately when you see something terrible happen in the world, the first question automatically becomes, oh my goodness, I wonder what happened to the children there, the children that these people were one generation ago, or what happened to their parents, even more importantly. And that shift of perception then changes deeply. If it doesn't change what we say in response, it changes the voice with which we say it. And that's important because our voice has impact in our activism. Even when you say the same stuff, our voice has impact. Story brings compassion, and that's why story is important. Story is always a compassion bringer. You can look at a monster in the world, and you'll see that monster very differently when you imagine that monster in their childhood that will open you up profoundly, because you have empathy circuits in your body that will be deeply, deeply moved and shocked by, and it's good to be shocked, this kind of shock, by knowing another person's backstory. Then when we say, no, you can't do that in society, you can't dig here. That's my favorite singer, David Crosby. You can't dig here. When we say that, but we say it with a different voice that doesn't just create more polarization and more resistance. Once we understand where monstrosity comes from, you feel it. Understanding is here. Here's just the early beginnings of understanding. It doesn't reach deep. Understanding is in the gut and in the heart. Changes our voice. So that's, I guess I'm giving you right now a kind of a feeling background for why I think that this inner child work is so important. And there's too many things for me to say about why it's important. Too many. And I want to leave that to your questions. I feel very challenged about the explaining part, because it doesn't normally happen. Why would we be doing inner child work as kind of social activists? You know, what's that got to do with things? You know, you normally would think of changing laws, changing the nature of education. You know, social activism is, whether it's the traditional thing is marching in the street, or bringing human rights litigation against companies and governments that want to dig for gas and coal. You know, that's activism. That is easily recognized. That's very material activism. If you do that, you're an activist. If you're a mother or a father, are you an activist? If you're the person in whose hands the heart of the next generation is being conditioned, are you an activist? If you're a person in conversation with somebody with very opposite political views, and you have an opportunity to connect with the person, are you an activist? I would say 93% of activism is completely invisible, because in our interactions, we are conditioning the soil. You don't see the plant, but we're conditioning the soil. And we are creatures of feeling and emotion and connection. We're driven by that. We used to think that the rational is what drives the bus. It has a very small influence. Decisions are made at the level of the gut brain, the heart brain, and the limbic brain. What then happens is that the decision is sent, the decision of how to relate, what choice to make, who to be kind to, who to be angry with, who to fall in love with. Those decisions are made at the neurology of emotion, and then that information is sent to the frontal lobes, which is the slow thinker, and it makes a rationale about why I made that decision. And we think that we make decisions logically and rationally. That is a secondary application to a decision that's already been made at the level of the heart. And we need to come to terms with that. That's who we are. We're beings of feeling. And this is the deep, ongoing, endless lament and frustration, head-banging frustration of activism around the world. We hear this a million times a day. Oh my God, we brought all of the information to the table. We brought all of the science to the table. It was incontrovertible. And nothing happened. People went home and kept doing the same thing. Information is important and necessary. It does help. It's woefully insufficient. Because it doesn't change the heart. It doesn't address the depth of emotional resistance. I remember learning that, for instance, with climate change, it doesn't matter how much people hear the science, okay? That it's so convincing, and that we're in horrible trouble if we don't leave the fossil fuels in the ground and start drawing down the carbon, etc. Just a complete reverse gear. And intelligence makes no difference. You've heard that 1,000 times, and my goodness, it needs to be said another 1,000 times because it's so deeply true. IQ, or intelligence, is not a force strong enough to intervene in the emotional reactivity that is triggered for us. The thing that's in the way is an emotional thing, not a lack of information. Emotional reaction that is triggered, and it runs deep. I noticed how terrified people are that the only way that we're going to keep fossil fuels in the ground is that government needs to intervene and regulate. Government needs to come in and say, no, you can't. A mandate from government. And that the usual, see, this, I read current affairs that way. I don't read it like data. My first question, my ongoing question is, what is coming up for people that's about their childhood wounds? So I'll give you this as an example, and I'll own it as the way that I see it. And maybe I'm completely wrong about that because I project like everybody does. I have my own wounds. But the voices that I hear are the voices of children and adolescents inside adults who are saying, I will die before I let mummy tell me what I'm supposed to do ever again. That broke my spirit too many times when I was a kid. It crushed my soul too many times when I was a kid. Being robbed of my agency by shaming parents, punishing parents. I have rage about that. White hot rage about that. I'm not going to let, and people say the nanny state. Look at the projection that's implicit in that. We don't register government as an instrument of our voice, a democratic thing. We register government as an evil, nasty big mummy, big daddy, or big school teacher coming to tell us what to do. Wow. So what happens when you start to contemplate that? How much of society, how much of history is just people shadow boxing with their own past? Whether we're projecting positively or negatively. And then when I bring my voice to my conversation, my civic conversation, in my writing or just chatter with people, how am I treating that person? You know, I can hear inside myself a river of projection where somebody that strongly disagrees with me and, you know, whatever, I don't know, I sit down and talk to somebody that's into, you know, who's a wolf of Wall Street, and I don't know how to see them. I see a lot of, you know, he's the bully that bullied me in my playground, and I want my revenge. Or you know, we carry those triggers a lot, and it was great to hear you guys speak about intergenerational trauma, because there's really none of us, in spite of how deeply loving our elders have been, and you know, kind of the heroic effort that our elders bring to trying to do their best. But, you know, none of us escape wounding. There are great scars and disappointments. There's the love, there's the playfulness, and there are even the wounds that we carry that our not even our own story, but the story of our ancestors, the story of our elders. We are triggerable in so many ways. By the way, we're also triggerable into bringing up the love and the joy and the playfulness from our own childhood. So there's all of that. I wish we had more time. We don't. But to talk about all of the ways in which there's value. Our body memory also brings you the capacity for deep, deep compassion and empathy, because your body remembers receiving that, even when the head doesn't. That's what's interesting about body memory. It's continuously coming up in waves, even when we don't make the audio-visual connection about a particular specific memory. It sits separately in the neurology. They call it implicit memory. It's not always tied up with narrative memory, different part of the brain, okay? But it conditions our perception so much. And I would